Asina would never have thought that she would meet her death under the sun, scorching and big, in such a strange place, so far from her home. And she looked incredibly charming. Opposite her stood a man dressed in expensive clothes that seemed to show his high status. He looked at the girl with his charming eyes and asked her what her last words would be. She closed her eyes, waiting for her death, and thought about how unfair it was to her. The Cromwell Empire is considered the ruler of the North, and their coat of arms with a dragon looks incredible. In this empire, the girl lived in luxury, in a gorgeous house like a mansion, wearing beautiful, expensive, luxurious dresses and wearing chic jewelry that cost as much as a house. But it didn't give her any pleasure at all. Maybe she was used to it, or maybe this life was simply not for her. This luxury is not for everyone. Life is like living in a cage. What was in her soul was to explore the world she was born into, all its places. Asina herself was very charming, like a princess, but she was not afraid of any work and loved beautiful landscapes. Although she was forced to live as she was told at first, she longed for something different in her heart. So different that when she got to a new place, she felt her blood boiling with emotion. That's how her life as a traveler began. And she visited many places. The girl met many people, saw how others live and other landscapes. She visited all corners of the northern continent and saw a completely different life and traditions. After that, she went straight to the south, where she wanted to see many new things. Asina wanted to get across the desert to the south, but something went wrong. It was a long road, there were many obstacles, the scorching sun and various sandstorms. It was not the same adventure as before. Although she had a map, since there was just sand everywhere, she no longer knew where south and north were and where to go. During this time, under the hot sun, she drank all the water she had. Looking again into the empty jar, which she must have looked into 100 times, there was no water. But opposite, not so far away, she squinted and saw 3 men dressed not so poorly and better equipped than she was. Asina thought that this was her chance to escape and find her way, so she hurried to the young men, but rather it was her fatal mistake. She stopped near them and shouted at them. One of them stepped forward, while the others put their hands on the weapon while she stopped and breathed in air. The girl looked them up and down, but was a little unsure, even though she didn't know what to expect. All she wanted was to know the right way, and she asked them about it. But looking back to the present, it can see that this was her fatal mistake. The man pointed the blade at the girl and asked her what her last words would be, and she did not understand what was happening. But she remained silent while he raised his blade and said that if she did not have them, that was all. Suddenly, the girl pushed the blade away and told him to take it away, because they could not kill her. The man was surprised at her insolence and asked her why they could not, and he stared at her. Asina's hands were trembling, but she didn't show it, so she just thought about whether or not she should do it. She began to slowly remove the cloak she had worn to protect herself from the heat in the desert. After taking it off, she said she was the most beautiful woman on the entire continent. She wanted to enchant him with her beautiful face, but he asked her what she was saying in puzzlement. She realized that she had to play the role to the end, and continued to speak with her hand to her heart. Asina said that in her opinion, every country should have a law to protect beautiful ladies, and that it is a basic thing to defend what you like, and asked other men if this was the case. The guy smirked for the first time in a long time and thought she was quite funny. But in the next moment, the smile fell, and raising the dagger, he asked sharply if these were her last words. The girl was clearly not expecting this after what she said, and all she could understand was that the situation was bad. Then she realized that she had to dodge the sword, and she stepped aside sharply. A little more time and she would not be here anymore. Since when do they kill like that, she thought. Then, under the influence of emotions, Asina began to assure him that he had no right to swing his sword like that, and that it was against the rules. But the man smiled again and asked her where there were rules that said so. The girl collapsed to the ground while he continued to talk about how eventually one of them would die and the other would live anyway, and that there is nothing more to talk about, to discuss and think about on the threshold of death. But suddenly, Asina looked into the man's eyes. It were bright red and very intense. She immediately recalled the image of the sun in summer, when it burns brightest, and his eyes were like that. At this time, the man seemed both interested in her conversations and, on the contrary, he wanted to end it quickly. He started to get closer and closer, and the girl was already quite frightened. He came as close as he could and took her face in his hands. He looked into her eyes and remained silent, while she had all sorts of thoughts about his behavior and actions. The mysterious man just stared crystalline, and at the last moment laughed. Then he pulled back a little, asking her how beautiful she thought she was, and smiled again. This behavior outraged the girl because she was really a beautiful girl. Having started to play with the girl's curls between his fingers, he continued to think aloud, expressing that he wanted to end it really quickly, but now his plans have changed somewhat. When he looked at her for the last time, the man said that she should be grateful that he had saved her life. Asina soon found herself imprisoned in a tall tower, so tall that you have to raise your head to see it in its entirety. The girl finally woke up and did not understand where she was, but it was clear that she had been abducted. She was very hot and thirsty, so she shouted out if anyone was there, hoping that someone would come. And indeed, she heard the tread of feet, a man walking with a bucket of water in his hands, and he had a weapon. At the next moment, the man came in and poured water on the girl, saying that she would soon be grateful for this. He wanted to see how long she could stand the scorching sun. Asina began to cough up the excess water, slowly regaining her composure as she had to deal with this. Then she said sarcastically that she felt better, and thanks to this shower, she was able to wake up. The girl began to realize where she was and what was wrong with her, and when she approached a small window, she looked out. She realized that she was in a prison in the very center of the city, and that people were treated badly in this place. Judging by all this, it could only be one place: the king of the desert, namely Pizian. Her native country, Cromwell, was located on the northern continent, and Pizian on the southern continent, and occupied a large territory. To make matters worse, the kingdom is not well disposed towards Cromwell, so it is not desirable for anyone to find out who the girl really is. But this was not the time to give up and get upset. She had to think about what to do next. This prison was specially designed for torture by the sun, and the girl was not adapted for this. So she had to figure out how to get out of here as quickly as possible and what she could do. Asina realized she had to escape immediately, so she found a hairpin. She managed to escape after breaking the lock. The streets were crowded, but most of people were poor and looked bad. The girl continued on her way, walking and walking to find a way to get out of the city. But suddenly, among all the other people, she noticed one who had noticed her gaze too much. He turned round and the girl recognized the man who was going to kill her. He looked like a sultan, all in gold. Asina picked the lock as skillfully as if she were a thief, and at the same time she remembered the past. She recalled moments when her mother used to comb her hair and that she got all her beauty from her mother. Her mother always took care of her and wanted her to become a real lady in the future. And every time a woman found out that her daughter had sneaked out of the house, she would lock her up. But Asina has always wanted to be adventurous, and she has never been a sweet and easygoing girl. In her mind, the girl thanked her mother for making her such a hardy person with her own hands. The next moment the lock opened and the girl was almost free. She just had to find her way. Due to the fact that her mother always put her under house arrest, the girl was in excellent physical shape. Since during her imprisonment, she trained and read a lot about hundreds of different types of escapes and went through each one in her head. A few minutes later, she was already free, and she consoled herself with the fact that it was not that difficult. The girl decided that prison was not the place for such beauties as her, so she had to find somewhere else to go. When she went out into the street, there were a lot of people. Everyone was doing their business. The girl needed to find suitable clothes, as women have to hide their faces to avoid seducing men. But in her case, this measure was even better, because it would be harder to recognize her while she was running away. Continuing on her way, she came across beautiful open spaces with a beautiful view. The girl recalled how she used to read a lot about Pizian when she was at home, and she knows a lot about him. That is why she wanted to visit this country, even though Pizian and Cromwell were enemies. All the houses here were made of sand, and there were many people of different nations and beautiful architecture. While enjoying her moment of freedom, Asina began to think a lot and behave recklessly and dangerously, but she really liked everything here. It was better than described in the books, and that's why she loves traveling. She loved new experiences and seeing new landscapes, people, and cultures. With joy, the girl began to jump on the spot and shout how happy she was here. But too many people turned round to see who was making the noise. So she calmed down. So she realized that she had to be quieter if she did not want to go back to prison. Despite the fact that she would be wanted in a couple of hours, she wanted to find a place to sleep. Suddenly, she realized that she hadn't eaten anything for days, so she needed to find something to eat immediately. Luckily, there was a meat with vegetable on a stick sold nearby, and she was very happy that she could eat something. Asina was grateful, and she was already eager to eat it, pushing down the veil from her face. But the next moment, she was so shocked that she couldn't even say anything, and the food fell out of her hands and was spoilt. But she didn't care anymore. She couldn't believe who she saw, and her hands started to tremble again. Among all the people in the crowd, she saw a familiar figure, but this time dressed in a luxurious way. It was him, the one who kidnapped her and almost killed her a few hours ago. But he seemed equally shocked to see her and remember who she was. Asina quickly covered her face again with a green veil in the hope that the man would not recognize her. The girl started to run to the opposite side, trying to calm her thoughts and get away as quickly as possible. When she reached an empty corner where there were no people, she finally stopped. The girl wanted to exhale, but then it dawned on her and a thought came to her, and she was right. The man was able to catch up with her and come here to get her, following her well. The girl had the courage to turn around because she had no other options. But she did not dare to look up at the man. He stood motionless, hovering over her, and she had to turn around again. Asina realized there was no chance the man didn't recognize her. Otherwise, he would not have followed her all the way here. And she did not know what was coming next and what would come into his head. Of course, the girl was afraid of what would happen next, but she was forced to turn to him again. At the next moment, the man suddenly pulled her backwards against him. Taking her by the waist with one hand and her arm with the other, he said that she had fled the prison like a mouse. He brought his face close to hers and told her to tell him how she had managed to escape. Asina looked into his ruby-red eyes and wanted to start saying something or lying. But in the next moment, the man, whose name was Sikad, was called out by others and interrupted their dialogue. A few more men came and asked if anything had happened. Sihad looked at those who had come and said he would be the first to return. Then he threw the girl into the hands of another man who had a beard and looked old. And he said that the man was responsible for her with his head, and after a little more thought, he wanted to leave. But in the end, he said that it was better not to disappoint him, because he knew what could happen. 2 guards began to drag the girl away, and she could not understand what was happening here at all. Asina began to worry whether he was going to execute her by accident. She shouted and shouted, but no one reacted, because no one interfered in Sihad's affairs. Meanwhile, Sihad was already at the palace and asked another man how she could have escaped, saying that she was clearly not like their women and thinking that something was wrong. The advisor suggested that he could use it to his advantage and that she might still be useful. Sihad asked him again, and he nodded after a moment's thought that it was a good idea. The man thought about it and said that although she was behaving aggressively, her manner of communication and appearance were unusual, and he gave out the idea that she might be the daughter of a noble in the northern continent. Sihad hummed thoughtfully and thought that might make sense. The man continued to say that they could persuade her to give them useful information. After thinking about it for a while, Sihad looked thoughtful, but said he had an idea. The man in blue clothes asked him with interest what ideas he had, and Sihad said with a smile on his face that he would take this woman to his harem, no matter how absurd it may sound. It was incredibly beautiful in Pizian, beautiful architecture, and, anyway, the desert itself. When the girl was brought to the palace, a woman immediately approached her and told her to follow her. The woman was also incredibly beautiful, and as they walked, Asina looked around. She marveled at how spacious the palace was, and that it was so beautiful. Indeed, the palm trees planted there added the gorgeous look. At last they came to a large, spacious door, which must have been 3 or 4 times bigger than the girl. But as soon as the door opened and the woman asked her to come in, the heroine simply went into shock. Inside, there were many women who stood submissively with their heads down, not daring to look up. Suddenly, Asina noticed a sly glint in the eyes of one of the women. The girl stood there in shock, and suddenly she was sobered up by someone grabbing her collar quite roughly. She started screaming and asking what was happening, but no one listened to her, and no one considered it necessary. All the girl's belongings and clothes gradually fell to the ground, and she did not understand what was happening. A few minutes later, all she was wearing was one large white bath towel that barely covered her entire. In the center of the room was a large bath, which could easily accommodate several people, and in the next moment, Asina felt herself being pushed there, without saying anything or explaining. Drops of water splashed in all directions, and the girls instantly surrounded the girl. After that, one of them began to soap the girl's body, while the other poured water on her. Asina was angry, because in her opinion, they could have at least explained to her what they wanted. Instead, they just stripped her naked, threw her into the pool, and started soaping her up. But on the other hand, it was better than staying in prison or being executed on the spot. After that, the girl was helped out of the bath and wrapped in a towel. She looked confused at the time. Then, one of the girls gave her clothes and told her that she had to wear this. When Asina saw the 2 pieces of fabric, she looked at the clothes in horror and asked if she had heard right that she really needed to wear that. In a beautiful room with many things made of gold, Sikad was sitting on the sofa, wearing a blue robe and grenades on the table. looking like a real king. Suddenly, he was reminded of the strange girl they had met in the desert. There was something mysterious and attractive about her. The servant who suddenly appeared, bowing, said that Sihad looked more pleased than ever. The man propped his head up with his hand and grinned and said he was very pleased. After all, he thought he had caught a cat, although at first he thought it was just a mouse. When the girl put on the clothes, she was shocked at what kind of clothes women wore here, because she was not used to it. In addition, these clothes were quite open, leaving no room for imagination, which further upset and embarrassed Asina. But she had to do it, because if she didn't wear it, those girls would have put it on her themselves. Then the girl realized with horror that her old clothes had disappeared, and she immediately wondered if it was by chance that the wrong girls had taken it and possibly thrown it away. But the biggest pain for her was the fact that there was a map, money, and most importantly, portraits of beautiful men. And even more important was her travel notebook, which could confirm her identity. Asina put her hand to her forehead because she didn't know where to even look for these things and what to do. Thank goodness her biggest ace, special charm earrings, was with her. They dyed her red eyes and silver hair brown, which allowed her to travel without fear. As Asina pondered the fate of her belongings, the woman turned to her and asked her to follow her. Then they walked together through various corridors and spaces and then reached the hall. The woman stopped, letting the girl pass and calling her to go inside. The girl clearly didn't like it, and it seemed to her that the further they went, the worse it got. The street was well lit, and there were many tropical palm trees for decoration. The room opened up, and there was a very nice, spacious bed. Like the room. The woman said that Asina would live here now. The girl was so absorbed in looking at the surroundings that she didn't hear what the woman was telling her. Suddenly, she heard the word harem and froze. The smile slipped from her face. But after collecting her thoughts, she asked again if she had understood it correctly, and then heard the statement. Continuing to disbelieve what she had heard, the girl asked what a harem meant, whether it was really a place where there were many women and one man owned them. When the beautiful woman replied that the girl had got it right, Asina's legs gave out and she fell to the floor. She even thought that being in prison would be much better than being here. After that, she realized that it could only be the work of that complete psycho. The woman hurried to the girl, saying that the floor was cold and she should be happy that she was in a harem. Because it is an honor, but the heroine could not stand it and started shouting that a man should have only one woman, not several, and that it is not an honor in any way, because it is complete nonsense according to her words and thoughts. She continued to assure the maid that she should take off her pink glasses because the girls were treated like toys here. But the woman said that she would, on the contrary, be very happy if Sikad perceived her as his toy. After these words, Asina realized that local women are very brainwashed, and there is no point in saying anything. Hugging the pillow, the girl began to pray that her god, Lamisha, would save her. She began to think a lot about what to do next and what her life would be like in the future. After that, the girl realized that it was too quiet for a harem, so she asked where the other girls were, to which the maid replied that the girl was the only Era in the harem. So it happens. The woman explained that Era was a high status in the harem and that all the servants had been waiting for a long time for their master to open the harem. Asina was very surprised by this discovery. At this time, Sihad was to meet with the leader of the Dara. The man told the servant in a stern voice to let him in and greet their guest. When Jalil entered the room, he introduced himself and greeted Rakun, saying that he had come from Dara. Sihad, as if nothing had happened, asked him why he had come here and what the reason was. The man replied that he had heard that the king had returned safely and had come to show his respect. But then he continued, saying that he had heard that Rakun bring a light-skinned woman, considered to be of low birth, into the harem. He expressed his regret that their ruler had brought such a woman into the harem. Jalil himself didn't realize he'd crossed the line by belittling Sihad. He only saw the man clutching a pomegranate in anger and pomegranate juice flowing down his hands. Rakun's eyes blazed with rage, though he was outwardly cold and calm. Sikad looked at the man and asked him in a high-pitched tone how he dared to humiliate him. Jalil began to worry because he could already feel Sihad's deadly aura, and that the ruler could easily kill him. So the stuttering man began to justify that it was all for Rakun's good. But the king said that he did not need it and ordered the man to go away. The man licked the juice running down his fingers as he stared at the departing impudent man, thinking that the bastard would see what would happen if he got in his way. It was already late at night, and there were many stars in the sky. At that time, everyone was asleep, but not the girl who was lying on the pillow with her arms around her. She realized that she could die in a little while at this rate, and nothing would save her. After all she dreamed of was seeing the desert, and life had such a surprise for her. But then she thought that she had to pull herself together, because otherwise she would not be able to come up with anything. Asina knew she could not become the wife of some dishonorable man. The girl had never seen him, never knew him, was afraid that he might even be too old for her. So she remembered how she was able to escape from the harshest prison, and that this would not be a problem for her either. As she continued to think this way, she realized that she now had two problems that needed to be solved. The first was that she had lost all her belongings and needed to find them in order to think. After all, there were too many important things that could confirm her identity, among other things. The book was the most important for her, because it represented many different roots and records. Secondly, it was her small pomegranate-colored earrings that were very important. They were the ones who helped her hide, but the spell did not last forever. Asina needed to take them off for a week because otherwise they could break and then everything would definitely be wrong. And then the girl made a conclusion for herself that meant she had to leave this place within a week. She realized that she had to look around and start acting one step at a time. It was midnight, and the moon was shining brightly on the streets and houses of this kingdom, as brightly as could be. Looking at the moon, the girl noticed that the moon here casts a slightly white color, although it is yellowish at home, and that this palace was very large, and that everywhere the houses seemed to be fastened together, making it more difficult to escape. Then Asina wondered why the guy was living in such a place and who he really was. A girl saw a tall tower and wanted to find out what it was built for. She was looking for something to grab onto and use to move herself. Then she jumped from one place to another and felt a bit of freedom, as she had done before. Not seeing anyone around the tower, she could not understand what the building was for. The only thing that gave away that this was the place of some influential person was luxury. So the next place she went was the garden. Asina started to look around. There was a lot of stuff, but she accidentally saw someone. It was some man who was in the pool, but he had his back to her, so she couldn't see who it was. The girl hid in a bush so that someone would not see her and execute her sooner than it could have been. She could not understand who it was, because it was late, and what could she do here? Therefore, she simply watched this figure closely so that she would not be noticed. The man began to wash his face. He was naked to the waist, so it looked like he was washing. And then he finally turned towards the girl, and she recognized him, because he was the psycho who almost killed her. Asina began to tremble near the bushes as she realized that she was about to be caught for the third time. After that, her best idea was to crawl away quietly, but it seems that she did not succeed in quietly. After all, a man saw her and came over and said that now she looked like a rat. After that, he just took her and threw her into the water, which made her even more shocked. He asked her if she was a spy or if she had a hobby of spying on others, but she just said that it was not like that. And then, having risen, Asina began to verbally attack him, asking who he was and how dare he kidnap people. Sihad just laughed and said that in this country he can do whatever he wants, and no one dares to tell him what to do. The girl, with a smile on her face and sarcasm, asked him if he was not the god or king of this country. The man smirked and replied that he was indeed the king of this country, and asked if she would be more honest after that. He lightly touched her chin and lifted her face. All the girl could do was stare at him, dumbfounded. He then moved closer and spoke directly into his ear, explaining that his name was Sihad Zain Behdad, and he is the ruler of Pisian. And then the girl's eyes widened in surprise. Asina asked in a trembling voice if he was really Rakun, the living god of Pisian. Sihad replied with a smug smile that the girl was well done if she knew who Rakun was here. She needed the next few minutes to digest this information. The man was tired of unnecessary questions, so he simply lifted the girl on his shoulder despite her scream and carried her away. Asina was hitting him with her little fists on the shoulder, saying that how could he treat her like that? She didn't understand where he was taking her, but obviously back inside this huge palace. Soon they were back in the same room, and the man just took her and threw her on the bed and stood next to her and had a lot of questions. First, he decided to ask her if she was a Cromwell spy because it was important to him. The girl realized that she had to hide from him that she was from Cromwell by any means necessary, so she replied that she came from another northern province and that she was no spy at all. Sihad then asked why she was looking for Kradia, as Pisian is at odds with this country, and the girl replied that she, just a traveler, wanted to see the area. Asina tried to use her charm and made a look of Milich eyes. She asked him to believe her words. Sikhat agreed after a while, or at least pretended to relax. He then asked if she was trying to seduce him by making such movements with her words and actions. The girl was confused and replied that she didn't know what she was talking about. Then suddenly she wondered where he was looking at, and that his gaze was rather strange. Asina looked down at herself and realized that her already translucent outfit was all wet and clinging tightly to her body. She screamed at him not to dare look at her in such an insolent manner. Suddenly, Sihad leaned forward and forced her to lie down on the bed, saying that she had recently said that she was the most beautiful. And then she remembered that she had indeed tried to charm him with her beauty. But she was on the verge of death then. Now she was very embarrassed and anxious, so she asked him to move away from her. But instead of moving away, Sihad came even closer to her and took her face in his hand. He turned her to face him and quietly said that although he could not say whether she was beautiful, her eyes were incredible for him. Asina froze in surprise and looked directly at him so that the man could see his reflection in her eyes. There was silence all around. You would have thought the whole world stood still for a moment as their gazes met and their breaths mingled. Sihad bent down even lower and pressed his lips to hers gently, as if he was afraid to hurt her but wanted to do it anyway. Although it is not clear why. He was still holding and squeezing her hands and kissing her, but she clearly did not like it. She tried to push him away. She understood that if she did nothing, it could lead to bad consequences. Asina tried to tell him to let her go and leave. In the end, the man slowly but surely moved away from her and did so gently. The girl looked at him with flaming cheeks and didn't know what to expect from him. Suddenly, a smile played on his lips, as if he was mocking the girl who was already outraged. Asina became even more embarrassed. The cheeky man had just stolen her first kiss and now he was laughing at her. Sihad looked at the girl with genuine interest and only said in a satisfied manner that he was pleased to welcome her into his harem. The next day, the sun was shining brightly outside and the weather was fine. The girl was still asleep when she heard some movement in the room. Finally, rubbing her eyes, she saw the girl and asked, "Who was she and what was she doing in this room?" To begin with, she just smiled. The girl with the short haircut said her name was Noor and explained that she was now her maid. She bowed her head and said it was a great honor to serve Era. So now she would help her with everything and so on. Asina said hello, but in her head it sounded like Sihad wanted someone to keep an eye on her and not let her wander off. The maid began to tell her that she had heard that Ira had fair skin and began to admire her beauty. And the girl asked her to tell her why everyone called her Ira. Noor replied in a friendly manner that this was the traditional name for a Kun's woman, so now everyone would call her that. In a trembling voice, the girl asked if the maid would go with her wherever she went and whatever she wanted. But to her delight, Noor replied that she was to serve her only in the chambers, and if she bored the mistress, she could ask her to leave. The girl poured tea and served Asina. Asina sipped her tea with relief and thought it wasn't so bad. The maid told her that she could call her at any time and said goodbye. The girl sat alone and looked at the huge room that was now hers. Asina sighed heavily. She had never imagined that she could become Raccoon's woman. Unlike Cromwell, where the people believed in the mystical goddess Lamisha, Picean is ruled by their own god who fulfills the duties of a ruler. Everyone worships it as they believe it brings water to the dry, sandy desert and enriches the local flora. In Picean, Kun is more than just a king. Everything in the country, from politics and the economy to cultural heritage, is under Kun's watch. He is seen as a living god. The girl could not accept that this psychopath was Raccoon, and that now it would be even harder for her to escape. Suddenly, she remembered their kiss last night. Her cheeks flared instantly again and she was angry. Whoever he was, he had no right to just do whatever he wanted to do. Asina was upset that he stole her first kiss. In her heart, she began to scream, wishing that this man would fall right on his bum. At this time, Nasir explained to Sihad his thoughts on why Jihad had said such nonsense. He went on to say that Jahid probably has no idea how well informed they is about what he has in mind, and asked if they should do anything against him. But Sihad said to leave it as it was, and that they would see how far his impudence would take him. A young man was standing behind Nasir and whispered to him to ask Sihad about the woman he had led into the harem. Nasir asked for permission to give his opinion on the girl Raccoon had brought into his harem. He said that the man seemed to be taking her more seriously than a mere amusement, that from the very beginning she was only supposed to be their spy and not someone he could trust. But all these words made Sihad angry, and his face changed very much at once. Seeing this, the advisor began to apologize as he realized that this could end badly. Suddenly, Karim came over to him and put his hand on his shoulder in support, saying that some people would be unhappy with Raccoon's decision, because too many high-ranking officials wanted their daughters to join a harem, and that now that Sihad has opened a harem, each of them will pester him to offer their daughters. The man said he wanted to know who the woman was and ordered them to bring her. Asina ate quietly, thinking about nothing until her maid came over. Noor said that Rakun wanted to see her, and the girl almost choked on those words. They walked along long, beautiful corridors, but the girl was outraged that she was not even allowed to eat and had to go somewhere in such a hurry. In her mind, she had already cursed him 3 times, because he was the only one who treated her with such contempt. At last they came, and when the doors opened, she saw a man sitting on a throne as befitted a king. Sihad silently watched the girl while Noor bowed low and said she had done his bidding and hurried away. Asina was overwhelmed by various emotions at that moment, because she was not used to these clothes and the fact that the maid had left her. So now she was alone with her problem. Moreover, she does not know what will come into his head this time, and she has not yet moved on from the past. The girl remembered their kiss, after which she is now ashamed to look his in the eye. But the man seemed to be in no hurry, as if he was enjoying the state she was in now. Then, as if nothing had happened, he propped his head up with his hand and asked with a chuckle how long she would avoid his gaze, and then, as if mockingly, asked how her first night in the harem had been. Asina thought that he was just shameless and that since he was planning to play with her, she accepts the rules of his game. The girl replied that she was not avoiding his gaze, but was just preparing herself mentally. Then she put one hand on her thigh and smiled radiantly and said she had had a wonderful night thanks to him and asked, "What about him?" Sihad got up from his chair and said that if she liked the harem so much, she could stay there forever. The girl gave a strained smile. She didn't know if he was joking or not. However, she continued and said that the offer did not appeal to her, so she wished to decline. The man, holding her carefully by the waist, said that last night she reminded him of a wild cat. He held her hand and caught himself thinking that her hands were quite warm, which was unusual. It seemed like he was carefully studying her, as if not wanting to miss a single detail. And then he remembered Nasir's words, that perhaps the girl was not as simple as she seemed at first glance. Suddenly, he loomed over her and asked what had brought her to Kratia. She looked at him a little nervously and again replied that she just wanted to see the area. But after these words, his expression changed, and he told her never to say that again, or she would regret it. She swallowed in horror and thought he was looking at her again with that terrible look in his eyes as he had then in the desert. She understood that his gaze was too intense, as if he was looking right inside her. But her intuition also told her to stay as far away from him as possible, for he would not bring her any good. So, the girl decided to change the topic to dates, since she had heard that Kratia was famous for them. She had thought of many excuses before, but now she couldn't recall a better one. Suddenly, the man asked her if she had really crossed the desert of death for such silly reasons. Asina looked at him as if she didn't know what he was talking about, because in all the books she had read, it never said that this was the desert of death. The two of them just stood, looking at each other, until his secretary entered and said the royal vizier had arrived. The girl was distracted from her thoughts and looked at the young man, for something about him seemed strange. Indeed, she recognized him, for she had seen him before, maybe even several times. It was the moment when she had been kidnapped, and it was he who had carried her to this tower, and he was quite handsome. The girl clapped her hands happily, rejoicing at his sudden appearance. Sihad asked the man to come in and introduced him to the girl as his secretary. After he introduced her to Nasir, the girl crossed her arms over her chest and as to whom he would introduce her to his secretary. Sihad went silent, and the girl decided she wasn't going to make it easy for him and introduce herself. Then he asked her name and she said Asina, and smiled sweetly in response. Nasir greeted her, saying that he hadn't recognized her in her new form. He said that Rakun must be pleased, to which the girl replied that of course, as she was an incredible woman. But Nasir said it was quite funny to say that in such a situation, and Sihad asked that she be taken away from here. The girl didn't understand what had happened but turned and left, with Nasir following her to make sure she didn't run away. Nasir nodded in response, and after escorting the girl, he returned to Sihad for a conversation. Sihad explained that this girl was making him uneasy, for now she spoke too easily and told too much. But when he had asked her earlier, she hadn't wanted to reveal anything, so this seemed very strange. He then ordered Nasir to find out as much as possible about her again, and what she might be hiding. In a beautiful room with a small library, everything was quite old-fashioned but cozy. The girl was given a veil because, according to their laws, she couldn't show her face to other men. Nasir told her to sit next to him and asked if she wasn't from Cromwell, then where was she from? She replied that she was from Sagrina, a small country located on the border with Cromwell. She went on explaining where and how it was, but the young man simply said that he had never even heard of such a country. She agreed that it was a small country, so few people knew about it. And then it dawned on her, and she decided to ask the man about one thing that interested her. She was very curious as to why the desert was called the Desert of Death. What had led to that name? Nasir explained that there was no water in this desert, and they couldn't store any at all. And that because of this, too many people died there. That's why it has that name. The man decided to add one myth, that there are rumors that the desert is shrouded in a curse. The young man decided to test her further, so he asked if she knew that Kratia and Pizian were enemies. The girl understood that she couldn't fall for this trap, so she said she was hearing about it for the first time. She held her hands together and said that she only knew that the people there didn't really like outsiders. Nasir explained that recently there had been a conflict between Kratia and Pizian, which was why there was such tension. Now the girl understood why she was perceived as a criminal. She recalled everything, including how she had asked how to get to Cromwell and other things, which had provoked the king. And because she had escaped from prison, she seemed even more suspicious to others. Suddenly, she thought that maybe it was for the best that she had ended up in prison. But her thoughts were interrupted by Nasir, who asked if he could ask her another question. He asked why she had gone straight through the desert if guides recommended avoiding it. But she said she had refused. And now he sat there in shock from her words, even more confused. He still couldn't figure out whether she was lying or not, but the fact that she had chosen such a path meant that something wasn't right. The girl sat immovably across from him with her veil, waiting to see if he would ask her anything else. Asina began to talk about how on the northern continent the mountains and rivers change their colors every season, but the meadows remain always lush and green. But what they don't have is an ocean full of sand. This answer surprised the man. It was because of it that she wanted to visit the desert, according to her words. And it was true. Now he understood, because he had always grown up here. And it was not unusual for him. As for her, the mountains and rivers. He then asked how she liked the desert and was told that it was incredible. And the girl liked it. And that she liked it so much that she didn't even think about the mercilessly scorching sun. She went on to explain that it was because of her experiences that she could not understand why such a wonderful place was called the Desert of Death. Nasir finally believed her because her words made sense, and understood her thoughts and why she was so strange. But besides this, he knew that no one could really disbelieve her when they looked into her eyes. When the interrogation seemed to be over, the man asked the girl to look at something. Asina saw that he was holding her bag and said that it was her stuff, that she had left it there. The man said that they had inspected her belongings and returned to the girl those that did not seem suspicious. The girl listened to him calmly as she knew they could find nothing suspicious. After all, her notebook was under a spell, so they would not be able to understand anything. Nasir then simply said that it seemed that this was enough questions, and if anything, they would continue next time. The girl agreed. She noted that he called her Lady Asina, not Ira like everyone else. She realized that it would be hard for her here, because soon the spell would have to break from the earrings, so she had to run away. Nasir was sitting at his desk and called Karim over. He looked quite handsome, wearing black and blue clothes and a saber on his belt. Nasir asked Karim to keep an eye on the harem, as the lady had already established herself there. But he asked again, and with a note of complaint in his voice, said that he was Rakun's tamer. Desert warriors were the strongest because they had no way out if they wanted to survive in the barren lands. They lived only to serve Rakun. Such guards were called tamers, and Karim was the strongest of these guards. He couldn't believe it was about that foreign woman. He was not pleased to have to guard her, for he served only Rakun. Nasir looked at the recorded answers of the girl and explained that she was still a little suspicious. And what's strange is that she was traveling alone, and what was her real purpose for coming here alone? Karim clenched his fists with anger and asked, why not just execute her if she was so suspicious? Nasir understood him, but added that she was probably not a spy. And that made it even more interesting what kind of person she was. Remembering her eyes and her aura, everything was too strange to just completely close the matter. And then he added that this was not only his request, but also Sihad's decree, so he should listen to it. He continued that there must be a good reason why Sihad did not kill her. But of course, Karim was not satisfied. The girl, meanwhile, was lying on the bed resting and thinking about what had happened during all these days. She thought about the situation with Nasir and realized that although he was good, he did not believe her words. Asina exhaled heavily and thought that given the way she had behaved before, it was no wonder they had mistaken her for a spy. After all, Cromwell and Kratia are enemies, so it's normal for them to try to be as careful as possible. Both kingdoms have a bad attitude towards Pizian, so she should be careful what she says. If they find out who this girl is, she and her family will be in danger. She knew that her parents would not allow the country to fall apart because of one conflict, but she was still worried. After all, the peace of mind of Cromwell's citizens and the security of Cromwell as a whole depended on it. Asina understood that although her father always supported her travels and her mother loved her very much, she still wanted them not to worry. And then her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was a maid, and she asked if she could come in. The girl explained that a tamer had come who would be responsible for her safety in the harem. Asina remembered the guy who was Rakun's bodyguard and told him to come in. But the guy didn't seem to care whether he was invited or not, because he just burst into the girl's room. He just walked purposefully towards the girl, stopped at her bedside and looking down at her with contempt. He just stood there staring at her for a few seconds, but his face showed that he hated her. The man didn't understand why she was here at all, what she was doing here, because she was too much trouble. Asina stared at him indifferently, without a trace of fear. Nir stood on the side and just kept silent, but she was used to this reaction because no one liked strangers. Asina understood that in such a situation she had to be polite, so she said she was glad to meet him. Then she sat up straight, apologizing for not having time to cover her face because he had entered too quickly. With a smile on her face, the girl explained that she was still not fully accustomed to such traditions here. Karim, on the other hand, was a little surprised to see her, because he thought that since she had escaped from prison, she should not look so fragile. He could not understand how she, so small and fragile, could have escaped from prison and come here through the desert. Then he realized that he might have made a mistake in bursting into her chamber in this way, so he apologized and introduced himself. The girl also said him her name and asked him not to call her Ira, just Asina. Then he bowed nicely and agreed, but he did not seem to accept it completely. Karim said he would stand outside her room door at all times and guard it, so if need be, she could call him. Asina just thought it would be even harder to escape now. The girl went for a walk because it was better than being locked in a room all day. Moreover, she needed to get to know the local area to make it easier for herself to escape. But it was not so simple, because on the way she met Sahad, who stopped her and asked where she was going. The girl stopped, a little shocked, and turned back, because she did not expect anyone else to be there. Sikad simply leaned on one of the columns and looked at her, waiting for her response. The man approached her slowly and silently. Asina was embarrassed and thought that he was the last person she wanted to see right now. She told him that he should stop following her because she already knew that she seemed suspicious to him. The girl went on the attack and asked him what he was doing here, but he smiled and said he didn't have to explain. Then the man took on a pensive look and said he had come because he wanted to see her. But this shocked and confused the girl even more because she did not understand what he wanted this time. She asked him, almost shouting if he had gone mad. Sihad was genuinely amused by her reaction, and he smiled. Then he looked intently into her eyes and realized that he was never bored with this girl. After all, there were usually only two emotions he could see in the eyes of people before him. And it was either fear or subservience, because he was king and could execute on the spot. So everyone feared his anger. But looking at this girl, he realized that she was completely different, and unlike any person he had ever met. She intrigued him with everything, with her rebelliousness, her beauty, her character, her suspicion, and of course with his wonderful eyes in which he seemed to see his own reflection. He understood that the way she looked at him was not fear or servility at all. It was something completely different, a soft look only she had. And then he took a lock of her hair and pulled it towards him. Sihad smiled mysteriously and asked her if she was comfortable in the harem and if she liked everything. Then suddenly he reached out his hand to her face, and blushing, the girl tried to ask what he was up to, for you could expect anything from him. But he put his hand on her head and stroked her as if to protect her from something. Asina felt too uncomfortable because he was too close to her and his breath burned her skin. She turned her head and asked how long he was going to hover over her like that, because she was uncomfortable. She swallowed and waited for him to say something, or finally do something, because he stood there silently. Sihad thought sadly about whether she felt uncomfortable around him in particular. He noticed her looking away from him in embarrassment, and then he thought maybe it was something else altogether. Maybe it's because he's a man, and she hasn't had experience with men. Suddenly, the girl interrupted his thoughts, saying that if she had known he was Rakun, she wouldn't have asked for directions. Sihad stretched out his arms on either side of the girl and leaned in, saying that a girl traveling all alone through the desert of death would have brought him attention anyway. But most of all, he would like to know how she escaped from Jahannam. At first, she did not understand what he was talking about, but then she realized that it was probably about that prison. The man said that no matter what, no one had ever escaped from that prison before her. He grabbed her hands and pinned them to the column above her head, and continued, asking her if she wanted to assure him again that it was just a coincidence. Asina just smiled sweetly and said that the lock was not difficult to break, and the gate was open. Sihad smiled and explained to her that she should understand what could happen if she continued to talk such nonsense. Then she continued, but this time screaming, releasing her hands, asking what else she had to do to get him to let her go. Suddenly, the man touched her chin and told her to provide evidence, but he looked at her strangely. His closeness made the girl's heart beat faster. And though he wanted her to give him proof of her innocence, how could she do that? After a while, the girl stood patiently while the maid finished helping her with her outfit. The girl thought that she would sooner find a way to escape than to prove her innocence. Because this man stayed in the harem that night, writing something at his desk, she did not sleep a wink all night. She hoped that he would not appear again today, and that she would be able to spend the day in peace. The girl looked around as she walked with the maid, because it seemed like something new and incomprehensible. She asked Nur if she knew why the harem was so big. The girl thought for a while and began to answer that the harem is usually intended for the raccoon's women. But besides that, orphaned girls could be taken in here, which is why the courtyard is so big and spacious. Asina was surprised and asked if all of them become his concubines, but the girl said that this rarely happens. Usually Raccoon marries them off to important people in Pizian. After all, Pesian has 6 supreme chiefs and 48 ordinary ones, and Kun suggests that they marry to ensure their power. And then the girl asked if there was anyone in the palace she should fear. After all, Raccoon was the most influential person, but she did not want there to be others who disliked her. Nur was silent for a while and thought about what to say to that. Then she said, after thinking about it, that after Sehad himself, the Grand Vizier is in power. Just at this moment, the Vizier arrived to meet the Sihad. Grand Vizier Gadik bowed and apologized for not being able to greet Raccoon earlier. But Sihad said he understood, because it really must have been hard for him to look after everything alone while he was away. Though the man smiled and said he was glad Sihad was back, he knew that the Vizier was a skillful snake and that he could not be trusted. Then the Vizier said that he would hold a banquet, and it was really necessary in honor of his successful return. He explained that while he was away, people were fasting and praying, so it was necessary to do so. Kun goes on a pilgrimage to the holy oasis of Ishmael every few years, so people always pray for him. They pray that he will come back safe, that there will be no problems on his way, and that he will return to them. And usually, after he returns, they always have a feast for a whole week so that people can rest and rejoice that their God has not abandoned them. At first, Sihad thought about the Vizier's words, but then he realized that something was strange about them. So he said in a rude tone that the Vizier must have other reasons for holding this feast. But the man only bowed and said that this was not true, and that he should not think anything else. Although this did not change Raccoon's mind, he calmed down a little, because he knew that everything would be seen later. The man thanked him for his trouble and asked if that was all he wanted to discuss with him. At first, the Vizier just looked at him in silence, and then said that he had one suggestion for Sihad. And then he said that he wanted to offer his daughter to him. Hearing this, Sihad tensed up. The Vizier said that he must remember his daughter Jakia. Since Raccoon had not previously been interested in women, he rejected her, and now he seems to have finally opened his heart. So he offers her to the king. Then he laughed slyly as if he had said nothing and waited in silence for the king's reply. But Sihad understood that he was just being pathetic, because he just wanted to provide for his daughter. He replied that he understood his noble motives, but stated that he was not going to let anyone else into his harem. Gedik was shocked, because he clearly did not expect such an attitude and such a response. He wanted to clarify what exactly he meant, but Sihad simply said that for today it was enough. But the man still called out to Raccoon and received such a menacing look in return that he had to silently lower his head and accept the fact that their conversation was over. Asina, meanwhile, enjoyed the scenery, because the architecture and everything was beautiful. The girl stood there, not knowing who was looking at her, but knowing that they were very good at hiding. And she wondered who was watching her so closely. But her maid did not understand what she was doing at all. However, she found a guy standing at the back of the column, and it was Karim. Surprisingly, she looked at him in shock because she had expected to see anyone, but clearly not him. She then asked him what he was doing here, since he was supposed to be guarding the harem. In her opinion, he was waiting for her to try to do something again, so he was watching her to make sure everything was okay. But she understood that he was unlucky to be caught red-handed. The girl decided to tease him a little. And with a completely innocent expression on her face, she turned to him. So she decided to tell him that since she could see his face in detail, she understood how beautiful he was. And then she began to say that he must be very popular because he was very handsome, and even asked if he had a girlfriend. She decided that the best way to get rid of him would be to chat his ears off and wear him out. Asina began to ask him about his weapons. She could see that Karim was embarrassed and that he had no experience with girls at all, so she didn't stop talking. She started asking him about the sword, his job, when he started working, and whether he had a relationship. But being carried away, the girl didn't hear the footsteps of someone she didn't expect to see yet. A man's voice asked when they had become so close, and the two turned around, not expecting Rakun to come. Sihad stood silently watching them. Everything around him was silent, even the birds. Nasir, running up, did not immediately notice the oppressive atmosphere and trying to catch his breath asked Sihad where he had gone so quickly. Then he noticed the man glaring menacingly at a frightened Karim, who had turned white. Rakun asked if the girl had fallen in love with his tamer. Behind his back, Nasir prayed that the girl would not say something stupid, but Asina smiled and said yes, because everyone loves knights, and he's also handsome. And she decided to finish Sihad off by asking him if he had come to find out her tastes in men. But he just laughed, because he knew that this woman had no idea that she was playing with fire. As he stood rubbing his forehead and trying to calm down, Nasir said from behind him that he wanted to see the girl and talk to her. The man wanted to ask the girl some questions about her continent, as he was interested in learning more. After a bit of thought, Asina just held out her hand and he didn't understand what was happening. Seeing that he did not understand, the girl said that she would not tell him for free. He turned to the king, looking at him uncomfortably, and asked her what she would like to receive. She asked him to return her belongings, namely her handbag. It seemed rather unusual. Nasir asked why she wanted it so badly. And then Sihad intervened in the dialogue, saying that he had even heard that some of her things had been spelled. The girl froze, not expecting them to be able to detect the enchantments. All she could think of was to say that her underwear was in the bag, because she knew that they wouldn't ask her any more questions. And then all the men were ashamed, because she explained that she didn't want anyone to see it. But while everyone was embarrassed, only Sihad was laughing, so he covered his smile and started laughing. The girl was outraged by this reaction, so she asked what was so funny about it. When he finished laughing, he said that she was really very unpredictable, and told Nasir to return the bag. Soon, evening gradually came. The views from here were very wonderful and beautiful. They wanted to treat Asina to dates, which were beautifully arranged on a plate, and there were lots of them. Since the girl got her bag back and was also treated to dates, she was happy to talk about everything. The girl asked what he wanted to know and started eating, and Nasir said he wanted to know a little about Cromwell. He asked Asina to tell him everything she knew and said it would be very useful. After a little thought, she realized that she could not tell something really important, because it could be a fatal mistake. Therefore, she thought that she could start with general information, which would not raise any suspicions. She told Nasir a lot about the nature, traditions, religion, and politics of Cromwell. She told him about the people there and how they live in general. She told him as if she was ordinary resident. The girl valued her homeland very much, so she would not have allowed herself to say anything unnecessary, anything that could harm the royal family or the people of Cromwell in any way. Nasir listened attentively, although this was not what he wanted to hear. But he wrote down everything, and then she began to talk about the two royal families. The first family is the Cardians, a family of knights, and the second family is the Astadias, a family of scientists, which is how they are perceived by the locals. And it is only because these two families have come together and are working together for the good of Cromwell that it is thriving. And that is why there is political stability in the country, and there have never been any internal uprisings. Then, stopping the girl's story, he thanked her and said that the information she had provided was enough for now. But then he smiled rather strangely and said that the heroine seemed to know a lot about Cromwell. Asina realized that this was her mistake, that she had told so much. So she said that this was general information, the one that everyone knows and anyone will tell. But his look remained fixed, and he asked if it was true. He thanked her and said that he hoped she would tell him a lot more next time. But she did not expect to be interrogated again. So she got up and asked when they would give her the bag back. The man just smiled sweetly and said that after asking all the necessary questions, the girl was very angry at him and was shocked by his actions in general, what he was doing. She realized that she had been deceived and she was very angry about it. She was at a loss for words, wondering what to do without her bag, as the spell would soon break. Asina realized as she sat outside in the evening that she was probably back at the very beginning of her plan. But what she noticed is that the guards here are not very well organized, so she estimated that she could easily escape from here. After the run, she wanted to get to Sirte, a city that was located between continents, more like a neutral city. But then she realized that problems needed to be solved as they came up in general. And to start with, she needed to get out a notebook. Suddenly, she felt a man's gaze on her, as if he were watching her, which she did not like at all. She turned around and realized that she had to do something about it, because they would not even let her escape. The girl was quite high up, but she didn't understand who might be watching, and who needed it at such a late hour, since everyone should have been asleep long ago, or at least stayed in their places. The man standing below stared at the girl jumping off the wall like a cat in surprise. The vizier asked him what was wrong, but the man said nothing. Gedik stared in surprise at the high chief, who was scrutinizing something in the night. Asina went around every corner but found no one, which was very strange because she could feel someone's eyes on her. The high chief at this time, intrigued, smiled and replied that it was just a little bunny, and was no great threat. Asina returned to the harem and decided to take a bath to de-stress and relax. She couldn't help but think that she had almost been caught. She thought she saw someone's eyes, but one thing was for sure, it wasn't good. Because comparing and recalling the king's gaze, it is simply imperious and a little scary. But that man's gaze, like a snake, chokes her, does not allow her to do anything or respond in any way. The girl looked tiredly at her reflection in the water, thinking that she wouldn't want to experience such a thing again. She looked at her reflection in the water to see if she was right in her thoughts. She realized that the earrings had changed color, which meant that the spell could have broken from them and from her. Although she calculated that they shouldn't have run out of mana so quickly, there was nothing she could do. So all she had to do was quickly take her clothes and remove her earrings, which were already useless. Asina couldn't walk around in her true form for long, so she decided to partially remove the spell. She quickly returned to her room and called a maid who began to comb her hair, which had already turned brown again. She had removed part of the spell, so her eyes took on a real hue. Nur brushed her hair, and Asina looked at her reflection in the mirror until the maid said she had something to tell her. After that, she said that Raccoon had been waiting for her for some time, so she should go to him. But she jumped out of the chair because she was shocked and a little panicked that he would notice anything strange. Suddenly, Sihad himself entered the room and said that he did not need an invitation to visit his beloved concubine. The girl wanted to get away from him to reduce the chance that he would see that something had changed in her. But the man started a conversation about her hair, saying that it was very long and beautiful, and asked whether it hindered her traveling. She replied that it did, so she wanted to cut it next time, because it was really uncomfortable. Asina immediately thought of her family, who would be against her cutting her hair, because according to them, it is a lady's decoration. And so she took a sad breath and said that she would leave everything as it was for now, so that they could grow further and then it would be seen. Sihad inquired and asked if she was the only child in the family, and she said yes, but said that there were other cousins who replaced her brothers and sisters. The girl sat down on the bed and suddenly heard a rustle from his side. The man asked if Asina was really her real name. She said it was and asked why he was asking. When she turned round, she noticed that Sihad stood up and walked towards her. The man stood opposite her, thinking that there were many things he didn't know about this woman but hoped to find out. He asked again if that was her name. The girl smiled and said it was real and that she would not lie about her name. She even said that her father had organized a 3-month election to choose her name, and that her name meant bright and blessed, and the meaning of the word was as pure as she was. Suddenly, she felt him touch her chin, which was unexpected for the girl. He looked into her eyes and stroked her cheek and said that she seemed to feel the full love of her parents and relatives. Sihad saw this as the opposite of himself, because he understood that he did not have and would not have such a thing. They stood there for a few minutes, each thinking about his own thing, and he began to recall his childhood. The man finally asked why she had left an obviously loving family and wonderful home and embarked on such a dangerous journey. But she was getting really fed up with this, so she got up and asked him the same question. Why is he still at home? In her emotions, the girl did not notice how she addressed him as Mr., and yet he was a king and a god for his people. The man calmly asked her what she had called him. The girl wondered if she had been too rude to the king in general. She corrected herself and called him Raccoon and asked if that was what she should call him. She gave his full name, namely Sikad, and asked what his name meant in general. And she remembered that Nasir called him the same way, but no one else called him by that name. The man told the girl that Sihad is the name of God. So when they say it, it means my God in simple terms. Then Asina asked what she should call him. And then she remembered that his name was actually Sihad Zain Behdad, and that if Sihad is a god and Rakun is the king, then perhaps Behdad is a real name. Sihad was about to say something, but she beat him to it and asked if she could call him Bahai. The man froze. No one had ever called him that before. But then he said with a smile that it sounded good in general and she could call him like that. And then she realized that she had never seen his real smile until that moment. The girl pulled herself together and asked him why he was asking so many questions, if he had nothing better to do. The man folded his arms across his chest and with a strange stretching of words replied that perhaps he fell in love with her. This shocked the girl very much because she did not expect such a response. She was embarrassed and turned away and stammered a little, saying that if he couldn't give himself the right answer, then he shouldn't say stupid things. She was about to leave because the whole situation was too awkward for her, but he held her hand. He gently pulled her to him by the waist and asked her why she had such an opinion of him, because he knew what he was talking about. Asina did not expect such a turn of events. Turning to him, she finally looked into his eyes, and he pulled her even closer and kissed her again as gently as he could. Holding her by the wrist, the man could feel her pulse quicken. He took a few steps forward until he had the girl pinned against the wall. Asina thought through the fog in her mind about why he always did it so suddenly. As their kiss continued, the girl could not say for sure whether she was against it or not. But she knew one thing. It could be too dangerous for her, and she needed to be the first to pull away. But suddenly the man himself stopped and pulled away from her. She looked at him in surprise, not realizing or expecting him to do such a thing. His thoughts were like a whirlwind, and he realized that he had just almost lost control of himself. He realized he was going crazy around her. Sihad said that it seemed that she was not very experienced with men. But this angered the girl even more. She clenched her fists and angrily asked why she had to be experienced and what exactly for. Seeing the girl shiver, Sihad replied that otherwise he wouldn't have stopped at a fleeting kiss. This made Asina very angry but also kind of humiliated. So she yelled at him and asked why he was doing this to her. Did he really want to please his ego in this way? But he calmly replied that he had already said that he had fallen in love with her, and that was why he was not forcing her to do anything. And that's why he pretended not to notice that her eyes had changed color. When he said that, he looked at her interestedly and waited for her reaction. And then he took her chin again and ran his finger along her lower lip. He looked into the true color of her eyes, not taking his eyes off her, as if he couldn't see everything he wanted to. To be continued. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and like these videos. Thank you for your support.